folks, welcome back to CGC Sawmill, or welcome to CGC Sawmill. If this is your first time watching us, we're a newer channel. We just started a couple months ago, and thought I'd share, some of the things I'm doing in the woods and on the mill with other people. And I'm definitely watching other people to gain knowledge in what they're doing. So today, I think, let's start out with a little thing, ticks, right? So it is springtime, and the tick population is at a peak I don't know if I've ever seen before. It was a wet winter, and the moisture allows them to breed more. They attach to the deer or whatever, and they reproduce, right? So it is at a high this year. I've never seen it so bad. We went out with the dogs one day, and they each came back with like 10 ticks on them. So doing a little test. I've got some water with some vinegar with some ivermectin sheep and cattle spray that I've combined together, and I've been, every time I take the dogs for a run, been putting that on them before they go and kind of watching to see if there's any ticks on them, and it seems like it's reduced the amount of ticks. They still have gotten a couple of them, but not like the first couple times that we went out. They were just plastered in ticks. So I'm going to keep an eye on that, and I'll report back to you on whether that actually works, because I don't like some of those nasty chemicals that they use on the pets. So I'm trying to go a little bit more natural with something to see if that'll work to keep those ticks off the dogs. But that's one thing today. And then another thing, I'll give you a tip I do on not leveling, but making sure that my bunks are parallel with my blade, right? So we'll go through this real quick, where I just use a little gauge block, a little wooden gauge block, to make sure that each one of my bunks is at the right height compared to my blade, right? That's an important one. So let's get started with that. Okay, here we go. This is a gauge block just made out of wood, right? So basically I used a chop saw, and I cut this at 4 inches exactly, right? So we have a 4-inch block that we are going to use as a gauge on each one of these bunks. We'll go to the left side and the right side of the bunk and make sure that we snugly fit with the blade. So basically we'll set the block on this side, and then we'll set the block on this side and make sure that when we swing our blade over top of this bunk, that it's exactly at 4 inches. First of all, we will, which I think I've already done, we will set our depth at 4 inches. And I can actually show you, if you're first time setting up and you're trying to get this magnet, this is just a magnet, if you're trying to get that placed in the right spot, this will help too, right? Because you can just use a gauge block to make sure you're 4 inches off of each one of the bunks. Alright, so we have a 4-inch gauge block. We're set at 4 inches, and I gotta move this, my stop, to keep it from rolling when the wind hits. Get that other way. We'll slide this up. Okay, so what we do is you get your 4-inch gauge block, you've got your blade height that's set to 4 inch, you just slide that in there and slide it across, and it should be equal tension all the way across it. Right, so it's nice and tight fit all the way across that. So then what we do is we go to each one of the bunks and we do that same thing. We want to make sure that that slides on each one of the bunks the same. So with one of these 4-inch gauge blocks that you make yourself, that just made out of it's a 2x4, I cut to exactly 4 inches, which I could sell these, I guess, for $9.99 a piece. All you gotta do is contact me. Just kidding. So with these, you can make sure that each one of your bunks compared to your blade. Oh, and that's right. Make sure your blade is tensioned during this test, right? So if your blade's not tensioned, you're not going to get the right results because the blade's going to dip. So you know, you can check to make sure that your 4 inches or whatever depth that you make your gauge block, it's that depth, and you'll know that you're cutting, you know, the thickness of boards you want, right? You're not cutting, you know, 1.5 inches on this side and 2 inches on that side, right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you on this Woodland Mills HM130 Max, there is 2 adjustments, for one adjustment for that side of the head and one adjustment for this side of the head. So what I'll do is I'll go around to the back here and I will show you where you can adjust, raise and lower. Like if you set this here and you're hitting on this block here, you know you got to raise the head up on this side to equal out what's on this side. So you're going to raise and lower this head to make this blade parallel with this bunk. So underneath, here's your engine here, and up underneath here, there's 2 adjustments. There's a bolt here with a nut on each side of it. If you draw it in this way, you're going to raise the head. If you slide it back that way, you're going to lower this side of the head over here, right? And then there's another bolt here that allows you to adjust the head on this side up and down as well, right? So what you can do is you use that gauge block down here on the bunk and set your blade over it, and you can raise and lower the one side and see how it sets on that gauge block to a certain height, and then you can do the same thing on this side. That'll give you, you'll make your blade parallel with your bunks. So if it is your first time setting this up, and if you use a gauge block and you raise and lower the head to a certain height that you want for a gauge block, so you know on each side it's equally from the bunk, and then you want to set your scale up, so your scale wasn't even on here yet, right? You know what that distance is, so you can now easily set your, let's see, you can set your magnetic scale to right where you want it. It's not easy with one hand to do this, but it should slide. There we go, to that 4 inch. Right, so that's one way to set up your scale. Okay, so we milled up these first couple 3 logs. I said I could get some 4x4s. I got 4x4 out of the pine, a 4x4 out of that ash, and then I got 5 boards. They are 1.25 inches out of that red maple. That is a nice looking wood, that red maple is. So beautiful looking texture to it. I just used some of that on a project. It is pretty wood. Alright, so I got thinking about this block gauge method that I was talking about, and I'm afraid somebody may misinterpret what I'm saying. So let's see here. What I did is I went down and I got a couple posts, a string, and a level, and I am going to show you, I guess I should show how to set up your mill. What we want is we want these bunks, all these bunks in one plane. In other words, you know, they're all in the same plane. You don't have one that's out of plane, right? They're all in the exact same plane. And then when you use the method with a gauge block, you know, that's just going to verify everything else, right? The blade itself is parallel to the bunks, right? And if the bunks are in one plane, that's going to make you cut even thickness wood and consistent wood. So I went and I grabbed 2 posts. I pounded this one in the ground over on this end, tied a string to it, ran that string all the way to the other end, and I pounded that into the ground on this side and tied the string off to it. I used a little strap here to tighten this to pull it back so that this string is almost guitar tight, right? I don't want any dipping going on in that string as it goes across that distance, because that's like 25 feet. So what we can do then, once we have it tied off on this side, is we can measure the distance that string is off of this bunk, and it is about 7 1/8 off of that bunk. So then we can go to the other side over here, and we can slide this string up and down on this post so that we get our 7 1/8 measurement on this side, which I already split it up and down and got my 7 1/8 measurement. So we're at 7 1/8 there as well. So now I know I'm the same distance off on both ends, right? So I've kind of put this line, this string line, compared to this bunk and that end bunk in a plane. So now what we can do is we can measure each one of these bunks in between and make sure they are the exact same height, right? And I did put a string level on this guy. I'm not perfectly level, so it has a little bit of a slope downhill, but that's all right. As long as I get these bunks in one plane, and then I set that blade to be parallel to those bunks, then I'm going to be cutting good wood. Alright, so let's measure these bunks here. And this, if we measure this one, it is right at 7. And that's because we have this stainless steel piece on top of the bunks to help things slide and to not damage these underneath these bunks as much, right? So that's about 1/8 of an inch thick. So that's why we're getting 7 there. And if we go to each one of these, which I've already done, we're at 7, right? So each one of these bunks was set to 7. So what you can do, if you can adjust these, right, these nuts for your footing up and down to get these, at least this side of the bunk, all in one plane, all the way down through. And you probably want these somewhat close. You don't want them way off, but then after you do that, you can come and grab your level and put your level on this, on a bunk, and you can adjust this side to get level, right? So let's do a level off of this, because that'll put this in the same plane. And then if we get these all level across here, everything should be in a good plane. And then you can use your gauge blocks if you want. That expensive gauge block that I'll sell for $9.99. And you can set your height of your blade to make sure it's going to hit right at 4 inches all the way across, just to double check, right? That you know, you're in that ballpark of hitting this plane and that plane all the way across, so you're going both planes. And that's basically, in a nutshell, how I leveled, or not leveled, but how I put my bunks in one plane, and then I set my blade height, raised and lowered the two sides to set my blade height correctly, so that I get the even thickness of my cuts, so that my cuts are evenly thick. Okay, folks, I think that's going to wrap it up for today. Definitely, you know, if you are first time putting your mill together, you want to make sure that you get your bunks in one plane. That's the first thing you need to do. And then secondly, get your blade in a plane that is parallel to the plane of your bunks, right? So there's some adjustments on both, right? So I showed you the string method. If you have a laser level, it might be a little easier, you know, because you can set both sides of the bunk off of that laser level. But if you don't have a laser level and you want to use a string, here's a method to use a string along with a level, just a hand level, to get these bunks in one plane. And then we also, at the beginning of this, showed you how to get your blade in another plane that's equal or parallel to the bunks. And then we did get some nice wood cut today, and a couple of small logs. I got some 4x4s out of those, and then we had a little bit bigger log that was red maple, and that turned out beautiful. So I appreciate you guys watching. Definitely give me some comments on this and give me a thumbs up. That helps spread the video, as you probably know if you're a YouTuber. And also subscribe, please. I appreciate you watching. You all have a good day and take care. Bye bye.